The video begins with aerial shots of empty cities. Abandoned cars line avenues, broken down buildings, smoke rising from afar. The wind blows old papers and torn flags, creating an almost suffocating silence. Gradually, a low, staticky sound invades the scene. The narration begins in a somber, almost whispered tone. There was a time when cities represented strength, progress, and security. But it only took a few days for all of that to turn into ruins. This is a portrait of the fall of cities and the silence that took over the streets. The screen shows flashes of crowded subways, desperate crowds, echoing sirens. As the outbreak spread beyond control, the promise of order crumbled. Governments declared states of emergency. Troops were sent to capitals. Barriers were erected, checkpoints installed, curfews announced on every screen. But no barricade could hold back the hunger, and no law could stop the contagion. The image cuts to soldiers erecting wire fences while people scream behind them. What began as a quarantine soon became a war zone. Entire cities were surrounded. Families were forcibly divided. Streets were blocked by tanks that no longer distinguished between civilians and enemies. The enemy, after all, was everywhere, and in every body. The sound of gunshots echoes. The camera follows a street lit by fire. When the first capital fell, the others followed like dominoes. São Paulo, New York, Tokyo, London, none of them survived. A single, infected person was enough to transform thousands in a matter of hours. The imposing architecture of the cities, built to last centuries, proved useless in the face of something invisible and implacable. Quick scenes show deserted bridges, burning buildings, abandoned train stations. Hospitals were the first to surrender. Packed to the rafters, doctors and nurses disappeared amid the screams of patients. Supermarkets became arenas of survival, where people fought over scraps. And the streets, once teeming with life, became corridors of shadows, marked by the smell of blood and smoke. The camera focuses on a bicycle lying on the ground, a torn child's backpack, and a deserted street in the background. The fall of cities was not just physical, it was also psychological. Fear crept into every corner. The sound of footsteps became dangerous. The sound of breathing behind you could be the last warning before the attack. And so silence became more terrifying than any scream. The narration pauses, and the video shows images of completely empty streets, with only the wind whistling. Then the narrator returns more seriously. The radio broadcasts called for calm. The news reports insisted the situation is under control. But anyone who looked out the window knew it was a lie. On the other side of the curtains, there were no more neighbors, no more police, no more help, just deserted streets and the distant echo of creatures that shouldn't exist. The image shows a reporter reporting live until he's attacked by something off-screen. The camera falls to the ground, remaining static. Evacuation attempts failed. Entire cities became traps. Overcrowded buses never reached their destinations. Overcrowded trains stopped in dark tunnels and never left. Airports were the first to fall, turning escape routes into graveyards of metal and bones. Wherever humanity tried to escape, there was infection already waiting. Scenes of abandoned planes, destroyed runways, suitcases scattered on the ground. In time, the noise ceased. The sirens stopped. The gunshots fell silent. What remained was emptiness. The silence of the streets, once teeming with life, became the anthem of a new world. A heavy silence, interrupted only by the shuffling of feet and the moaning of those who were never human again. The camera pans down a deserted avenue. A lone infected person staggers in the background. The fall of the cities was the definitive announcement. Civilization was over. It didn't matter how many buildings remained standing, how many walls were erected. What was lost wasn't just territory. It was the idea of security, of routine, of normality. None of that survived. The narration intensifies towards the climax. And so, the silence of the streets became the new normal, a silence that speaks louder than any explosion. It says, there is no more police, no more government, no more help, just isolated survivors, hidden among the rubble, waiting for the inevitable. The screen goes dark. The sound of the wind returns. The narrator concludes in a slow voice. The fall of the cities was not just the end of the world as we knew it. It was the birth of something new, something hungry, something relentless. And when the streets fell silent, humanity fell silent too. Because in the silence, there was no one left to scream. The video opens in slow motion. A neon-lit metropolis is shown from above, as if it were still alive. Cars stuck in traffic, horns honking, people crossing pedestrian crossings. But gradually, the lights go out one by one until the city is plunged into darkness. The narration begins. For centuries, we believed that cities were fortresses of humanity, places where crowds protected themselves from nature, time, and chaos. But the truth is that faced with the invisible enemy that was born that night, every avenue became a death trap, every corner a dead end, and every crowd a time bomb ready to explode. Flashes of footage show panicked faces, hospital corridors, and people running on subways. The first hours of the outbreak in the cities were marked by misinformation. Some said it was just a passing fever. Others believed in biological terrorism. But no one was prepared for the speed with which it all happened. In less than 24 hours, entire neighborhoods were in collapse. The sound of helicopters flying overhead. Loudspeakers announcing mandatory evacuation. Governments tried to react. Military personnel closed urban borders, blocked roads, and tore down bridges to stem the tide of people trying to escape. But there was no holding back millions of terrified people. The city ceased to be a home and became a hunting ground. The screen cuts to a crowd smashing through barricades, while soldiers fire without distinguishing who is infected and who is not. And when chaos takes over, the city itself turns against its inhabitants. The buildings become concrete tombs. The streets, alleys where one enters but never leaves. What was built to protect has imprisoned. Scenes of burning skyscrapers, stalled elevators filled with bodies, apartments locked from the inside. The silence didn't come immediately. First came the noise, explosions, screams, sirens, endless gunfire. But as the days dragged on, the sound faded. The screams became moans. The gunshots became distant echoes. And when the last helicopter fell from the sky, the whole city fell silent. The camera pans. Down a dark tunnel with abandoned cars and signs of a struggle. It wasn't just the physical structure that collapsed. It was the very idea of community. People who were once neighbors became suspicious of each other. The fear of a cough, a feverish look, a scratching fingernail against the door, turned society into an enemy of itself. The survival instinct killed faster than the infection. Scene shows a family arguing over food, and then, just silence behind a closed door. The great cities that never slept, like New York, São Paulo, or Tokyo, have become concrete cemeteries. Streets lit by giant billboards now shine for no one. The subway, once the lungs of the cities, has become an iron catacomb. The silence of the streets is, in fact, the invisible lament of millions of voices that were erased all at once. The narrator pauses. Only the sound of the wind is heard. And those who remained learned to fear this silence, because in cities, silence never comes alone. It is broken by the shuffle of feet on the asphalt, the cracking of bones in the alleys, the whispers of creatures that were once human. Surviving came to mean listening carefully, and sometimes it meant making no noise at all, because any sound could bring about the end. The screen shows survivors hiding inside an overturned bus, covering their mouths to keep from breathing loudly. Some tried to resist. There were communities that erected makeshift barricades, closing entire streets, turning avenues into walls. But nothing could hold back the hunger of the infected. When the first barrier gave way, it was a matter of minutes until silence returned, bringing only smoke and bodies scattered across the ground. Cut to images of buildings with burned-out windows, streets with dozens of abandoned cars, broken-down doors. Others took refuge underground. Subway stations became temporary fortresses. Sewer tunnels became escape routes. But soon darkness also took over, because there was no place where the infection could not reach. The narration rises in tone. The fall of cities was more than the failure of civilization. It was the revelation of our fragility. We discovered that all the progress, all the technology, all the lights and glass towers meant nothing before an enemy that fed on the human heart itself. Cities, once a source of pride, became cemeteries. Monuments of arrogance devoured by silence. A drone flies over a ruined city center, not a living soul, just smoke, fire, and wind. In the end, humanity didn't just lose its homes. It lost the right to call any place safe. The city became a forbidden memory, a ruin where only the desperate dare enter, because anyone who walks among its abandoned buildings soon discovers that the silence of the streets is just the breath held before the attack. The camera zooms in on an empty alley. The sound seems to disappear completely, until, slowly, glowing eyes emerge from the darkness. The narrator concludes in a deep voice, full of regret. The fall of the cities marked the end of the human era. There was no applause, no speeches, no waving flags. Only silence remained, and in it, a warning. The warning that when cities fall, nothing remains but darkness. And within that darkness, there is no hope, only hunger. The screen fades to black. The final sound is of wind mixed with the distant echo of a broken scream.